Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and welcome, and thank you very much for coming to watch this lecture with funny bits, all about the amazing history of mining. And I have a friend called Dominic, and bizarrely enough, and he writes jokes for a living, and he writes jokes for people like Jimmy Carr and Sacha Baron Cohen and Ricky Gervais, and sometimes even Dominic Frisby. And one of the things that he says is that the process of writing a joke is not a process of invention, it's a process of discovery. You're pulling back the sand to see what's there. And there's another veteran billionaire trader who I follow on Twitter by the name of Peter Brand, and he says exactly the same thing. A trade is a process of discovery. And similarly, going through the Fringe brochure up at the Edinburgh Festival trying to find a decent show is also a process of discovery. And indeed, mining itself is a process of discovery. You're pulling away the rock and the sand and the earth in order to find out what's there. And it's quite interesting. I think over the course of history, human beings have often got muddled between what is invention and what is really only discovery. Anyway, with that in mind, we're going to start with this quote. I was listening to a podcast in 2011, and there was this old Texan man with a real kind of Texan drawl, and he's actually died, and I haven't been able to find out what his name is because I can't find the podcast. So I just Googled, I put into my AI art app, wise old Texan, and it came back with that picture there. So that's not actually what he looks like, but we'll just go with it. But he said there are three ways you can add real wealth to the world. You can grow stuff, you can make stuff, or you can mine stuff. And everything else is just pushing about what's already there. And I always thought that was quite a profound thought. And let's keep it at the back of our minds as we go through this lecture. So let's do a quick straw poll. Broadly speaking, do we think mining is a good thing? Let's sort of raise our hands. Okay. And it's a slightly biased audience that I attract. I don't tend to get the... but raise our hands if we think it's a bad thing. Nobody, but even if... there's probably a couple of you out there, but just keeping quiet. And often people shout out, it's a necessary evil, which is a sort of halfway medium between the two. But over the course, we'll look and see if it's a good or a bad thing. It's one of the questions that we'll be asking. But all mining is, basically, it is the process of extracting stuff from the earth. That is what mining basically is. So let's start with a question for you. What is the oldest profession? And prostitution, absolutely right. A few of you quick to shout that out. I have since learned that we're not actually allowed to say prostitute anymore. You have to call it sex worker. I've recently learned. But yes, people say that prostitution is the oldest profession. And if we imagine ourselves in the ancient world, in ancient Mesopotamia, here we have an ancient Mesopotamian sex worker, as imagined by AI, and there she is. And I have my doubts. That's all I'm going to say. I have my doubts. I was watching this documentary all about beauty. Well, I was actually presenting this documentary all about beauty, and we were interviewing these beauty experts, and one of them was a Darwinian beauty expert, and he argued that because of sexual selection, human beings have got progressively good-looking with each generation, and that therefore means that sitting in this room, ladies and gentlemen, we have the most beautiful people in history, and it's a pleasure to be sharing the room with such lookers. But in any case, if that argument is true, it's very unlikely that an ancient Mesopotamian sex worker would have looked like that. But in any case, whatever she looked like, what would we have had to pay this lady with? Gold, absolutely right. Gold or silver, or perhaps even bronze or something down if she wasn't as good looking as that. But in any case, whatever she was paid with, gold or silver, how would we have obtained that gold or silver? Mining, of course. And therefore, by its own definition, mining precedes prostitution as the world's oldest profession. And there are actually examples of stone tools that have been found in Kenya, which predate not just Homo sapiens, but the Homo genus by about 1 million years. So mining long since predates humankind. And here there have been examples of Neanderthal mines that have been found in, of all places, Hungary. I don't know why, but Hungary is obviously the world centre of Neanderthals. It produced Attila the Hun, I guess. So in any case, there have been examples of Neanderthal flint weapons and tools, Neanderthal mining that have been found. And here are those Neanderthal miners hard at work. This was taken on an iPhone some millions of years ago. But we contrast this image of Neanderthal mining with this picture taken, and this is a genuine underground mine in Australia. But you can see and those trucks, by the way, are absolutely enormous. They're probably as big as this building. They are that big. And mining is one of the few areas where automated driving actually happens on a regular basis. We don't have automated self-driving vehicles on the roads yet, but in mines they already exist, and they are, economically viable and regulated and accepted and everything else. But those trucks are, as big as a house. They are just huge. And so we have this incredible modern technology, but basically they're just doing exactly the same thing, which is sifting through the earth, trying to extract valuable stuff. So even in this high-tech way that we do it, it's still exactly the same principle. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the oldest mine in the world. It's 43,000 years old. And it's called the Ngwenya mine in Eswatini, which is now Swaziland. And it actually shut down in 2018. But the reason it shut down was because of the dispute between the owners, an Indian company owns it, and the locals over environmental stuff and wrongdoing and bribery and corruption and all the rest of it. But that mine has been producing, it's an iron ore mine, it's been producing for 43,000 years. And it's incredible to think that even after all that time, were that dispute not happening, that mine would still be producing. Paleolithic humans used it to get hematite to colour their skin with. And great tragedy, there was an arson at this mine, and a lot of the ancient stuff that got mined got ruined got destroyed in the arson, unfortunately. And until the 13th century, I found this quite interesting. We only actually knew of 7 metals. In fact, we knew about 8 or 9. We knew about antimony and zinc, but they weren't considered metals. And so each metal was given a planet and a day of the week. And now I think it's 95 different metals that we know about. But until the 13th century, we only knew of 7. Gold, silver, iron, mercury, tin, copper, and lead. And if you think, there's a list of the main industries around the world: agriculture, manufacturing, energy, and so on. And if you look through that list, none of them could exist without mining. And if you look around in this room, everything you see in this room is here because of mining. The world around us, it just could not exist without mining. Mining is absolutely foundational to everything. And if you look back at British history, the British were once with that in... I actually typed in minging is foundational to everything. I accidentally typed into my AI app. Oh dear, it's my daughter calling me. Sorry about that. I wondered why it didn't get a laugh, and I realised my daughter's on the phone. There we go. But yeah, I actually accidentally typed in minging is foundational to everything, and AI came back with this incredible image. I mean, I don't know, it's just incredible. In about 30 seconds, it's just incredible what AI can do. But yes, so minging is foundational to everything, just as mining is. But with all that in mind, how many producing metal mines are there in the UK, in mainland UK, not including Northern Ireland or Ireland? And the person that gets the right answer, I'm going to give a free copy of one of my CDs to. So one person says 2. 7. 0. He's absolutely right. There you go. What's your name? Niall. There you go, Niall. You can have a free CD. There is not one producing metal mine. Your challenge, Niall, is to find something to play it on. What's a CD? Yeah, you look too young to know about mining. But anyway, there is not one producing metal mine in the UK. And this is a list taken from the Directory of Mines and Quarries in the year 2000. And you can see there's lots of gravel quarries and clay and shale and peat and that kind of thing. But these metal mines here, the iron ore mine is not producing, the lead mine is not producing, those tin mines in Cornwall, none of them are producing. There is not one producing metal mine in the UK. I just find that incredible, especially when you consider just how culturally important mining is in British history. A fantastic book by Jeremy Paxman that I've just finished reading, all about the history of coal. And he argues that coal, we couldn't have had the empire without coal. Everything was built on the energy provided by coal. And you just think of, you know, the Camborne School of Mines, the Royal College of Mines. We were the global centre of mines. We sent all our mining, our miners, our technology, our expertise to California, Australia, South Africa, South America, all over the world. And today, we do not have a single producing metal mine. I just find that absolutely incredible. The S&P 500 is an index of the largest 500 companies in America. What percentage of that index is allocated to mining? And the person that gets that right can also have a copy of my CD. So we have 3% there, 20% there, 5, but nearly. You can have a seat. The correct answer is 0.6% allocate. There you go. There's your... will you pass it back? I thought it was you that won it, but there we go. Don't steal it on the way back. 0.6%. It goes up a little bit if you include energy, oil and gas. It goes up to 4.3%. And maybe oil and gas should be included because they are the process of extracting stuff from the ground. But excluding oil and gas, the answer is 0.6%. And the reason, I think, for this is so much has to do with scalability. Now, if you imagine the digital world, let's just say I invent a brilliant app, the world's best app, and I can put it on, I put it on the App Store, and in theory, 1 billion people can download that app tomorrow. You know, anyone without access to the App Store. If Google does one little change to its algorithm and it uploads it, billions of people around the world can suddenly use that change to this algorithm. So there's an incredible scalability to digital. But mining, the process, first somebody has to make a discovery. And there are many geologists who go through their entire life without making a discovery. But once a discovery gets made, the time from discovery through to actual production is 15 to 20 years. So that's 15 to 20 years before that mine starts making a profit. That's a long time to wait for a return on your money. And many people, you know, it's not attractive to investors. And there are so many things that can go wrong over the course of that 15 to 20 years. It might turn out that once the initial discovery is made, you have to drill around a bit, you drill around, you dig around, you do all sorts of tests. You might discover after a few years that it's just not economic. There's just not enough there. Or the political situation can change and you might get a very anti-mining politician or something that prevents any progress. Or it might turn out that metal prices change and what looked economic at one point is no longer economic. There's just so much that can happen over 15 to 20 years. And also what happens a great deal is the person that made the original discovery might have been exaggerating. Or even lying. And I'm afraid that is built into mining because in order to attract investment to drill out and see what you've got there, you have to sell blue sky. You have to go, we've got the world's biggest discovery here. It's going to make you rich. Invest, invest, invest. So the whole process lends itself to exaggeration. And one man who found this out to his great cost was Samuel Clemens, a.k.a. Mark Twain, the great American wit and writer. In 1862, there was a huge silver discovery in a place called Comstock Lode in Nevada. And it produced some of America's first 100 millionaires. Fortunes got made. And Mark Twain was working in the Mississippi at the time on the riverboats. And he heard about this silver rush. And he saved up, I think it was a month's wage, paid $150 and got a stagecoach ticket across the states. Took him 21 days to get there. And he arrived at exactly the wrong time in the cycle. Because all the easy to find silver had already been discovered, the companies had started moving in, and it was no longer economically viable for individual operators to make a fortune there. But it looked like it was still possible. If he'd got a year or two later, he would have realised there was nothing doing. A year or two earlier, he might have made the money, but he got there at exactly the wrong time. And he spent a year in what he called hard and long and dismal labour. And he made a number of investments, and he lost everything. And he ended up, he described it as one prospect was a dead sure thing, but then it is the deadest country for disappointments the world ever saw. And he ended up shoveling tailings in a quartz mill to earn a living. And he started drinking very heavily. And he would go into this local bar, and when he walked into the bar, he would call out, "Mark Twain." And that was for the barman to put 2 marks up on the chalkboard against his name for the 2 whiskies that he was about to drink. Now, did anyone see my show about weights and measures a couple of years ago? A few of you. Can you remember what that distance was? Anyone?
A yard.
It's actually 2 yards. It's a fathom. And it's used as a measure of depth, 6 feet, a fathom. And it was used by sailors as a measure of depth because it was quick. You could pull the rope like that and you could quickly work out how deep the water was with your piece of rope. And when the Mississippi boats were the paddle steamers, they needed 2 fathoms of depth in order for the paddles to turn safely. And so somebody on the boat would shout out Mark Twain to mark the 2 fathoms of depth. And that's why Mark Twain started shouting out Mark Twain when he was pissed for the two things. But anyway, one of the people he was speaking to in the bar worked for was the editor of a local magazine and gave him a job writing. And that's how he got started in his career as a great wit, because of failed mining investments. So I hope that my failed mining investments will kickstart my comedy career as well. But he ended up coining the great line about mining, which is a gold mine is a hole in the ground with a liar at the top. And that was the great definition of mining and the bullshit that comes with it. So here's a nice little story for you. In the 16th century, there was a prospector by the name of Stefan Schlick, who was exploring for metal in the ore mountains of Bohemia, which would be on the sort of borders between the Czech Republic and Germany. And he found silver in a mountain there called, and the mountain was called Joachim's Tal, which would translate literally as Joachim's Dale, as in over hill, over dale. And as a result of his discovery, he made an absolute fortune and a silver mine was built. And he started, in those days, miners would mint coins from their own production. And he started minting these 1-ounce silver coins, which were called Joachim's Talers, or Joachim's Talers. And these coins, these 1-ounce silver coins, became incredibly popular, and they were adopted throughout Europe, first by the Holy Roman Empire. In those days, there were so many city-states, everyone was mining their own coins, and the value of the coins, of course, was determined by the metal weight. But the Holy Roman Empire adopted these 1-ounce coins, and they were eventually copied across Europe. The Spanish had their peso, the Dutch had the dalda, the Scandinavians the daler, the Swiss the taler, and the French the écu. And the English had the crown. But they were all 1-ounce silver coins. And of these silver coins, the most successful coin was the Spanish dollar. And there is a Spanish dollar. And most of the reason for the success of the Spanish dollar was the enormous discoveries of gold and silver especially, made in Central and South America by the Spanish conquistadors. And this mountain here is called Cerro Rico, which literally means the rich mountain. And that mountain has produced 50,000 tons of silver throughout its history. And they think there's another 60,000 tons in there. And in the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries, that one mountain produced 80% of the world's silver. It's just an incredible number. And the Spanish, of course, started minting their silver dollars. And these dollars, there were 8 Spanish reales to $1. And that's why the parrots would always cry out, pieces of 8. That's where that comes from, because there was 8, so 1 piece of 8. And that's why they cried that. And my ex-girlfriend is a comedian, and I got her to come and see the show, and she wrote me this joke, which I can't say without saying it was actually written by a woman, but about the parrots, she said, typical birds, always talking about money. But she wrote it, not me, so I'm disclaiming all responsibility. In any case, these Spanish coins, they went from South America across the Pacific to China, Japan, the Philippines, and they became the basis for the currencies there. They made their way back to Europe, and they also went to North America. And they were basically a hugely successful international currency. And in North America at the time, the British, in their wisdom, had told the settlers that they weren't allowed to mint their own coins. They had to use British coins, but at the time there was a massive shortage of silver in Britain, which we'll come to in a moment. So there was a shortage of coinage, which meant that the Spanish dollars were embraced even more. And when the Americans, unwisely in my view, overthrew their British overlords, they needed to design a new currency, and it was based, Alexander Hamilton designed it, he of Hamilton fame, and $1 would be the value of a Spanish mill dollar as the same is now current. So the US dollar was 1 ounce of silver. It was a Spanish dollar. And even the S dollar symbol is actually derived from the peso, the P and the S. But that's all a dollar is. It literally means from the Dale. How about that? From that little discovery in Czechoslovakia. And now if you go and visit that town, there's like about 2,400 people live there, and it seems to have no awareness of this incredible history. So here's another game for you. We'll just shout out some countries, and we're going to work out which are the world's leading mining countries by the total value of everything they produce in a year. Australia. Okay, Australia. Well, fifth. We're going to start from the bottom up. So who is the 5th largest? South Africa, good guess. The correct answer is Chile. Chile, and 30% of Chilean GDP comes from its copper mines. And there is the largest copper mine in Chile, Escondida. And that is 3,000 metres, it's at 3,000 metres altitude. And it's owned by BHP, Australian company. And that one mine is responsible for about 2.5–3% of Chilean GDP. And you can just see what an incredible feat of engineering it is. Right, who's 4th on the list?
Canada.
Canada, good guess. Wrong. Russia. It's good though. It's quicker. The show's quicker if you just shout out countries. Russia is the 4th. Russia actually has the most valuable reserves by reserve, but in terms of actual production, it's only 4th. And there is one of Russia's most famous mine. That mine is in Siberia. And it's a diamond mine called the Mir mine. And it goes 500 metres deep. And it's such a perfect circle that when it's windy, you get the centrifugal force. You're not allowed to fly helicopters or planes or anything anywhere near it because the centrifugal force takes the aircraft down. But again, another incredible feat of engineering. It's now gone underground, and it's in Siberia, so you get the 24-hour days and the 24-hour nights and all that stuff. 3rd, United States. Well done. And here is the largest mine in the United States, Bingham Canyon, which it's the largest copper mine in the world. It's also the biggest pit in the world. It's not the deepest pit. It goes to 1,200 metres. The deepest mine in the world is in South Africa, called the Mponeng mine, which is 2.5 miles underground. 2.5 miles. Imagine getting the lift to work in the morning, 2.5 miles underground. Terrifying. Put your hands up if you've actually been inside an underground mine. Okay, quite a lot of you. Did you can feel that there's a sort of power to them? It's weird. There's this sort of awe, a strength. Now, one of the dwarves were all kind of in awe of power. Dwarves, by the way, all the miners of myth, dwarves, leprechauns, gnomes, they're always very small and very strong, which is the ideal physique for mining, small and strong. But yes, this mine is it's been producing copper since 1906, and it still goes on producing copper today. And it was just found by two brothers, two Latter-day Saints, one afternoon when they were grazing their cattle. Imagine finding the world's most prolific copper mine of an afternoon. Incredible feat of engineering. Who's the second largest producer in the world? Wales. Once upon a time. We're 100 years out of date, but there we go. Australia is the second largest producer, and you can see by volume it's quite a way above United States. And there is Australia's largest mine, Mount Whaleback. That's an iron ore mine. And again, that mine is 4 miles long. That pit, and 1.5 miles across. Again, incredible feat of engineering. And then the world's largest miner? China. Absolutely right, of course. But unfortunately, if you try and get pictures of China's largest mines, you can't get them. So I can't show you a picture of China's largest mines. So those are the world's largest producers by nation. And there we have the world's largest producers by company. BHP and Rio are both Australian companies. Southern Copper is Mexican, Glencore Swiss, and Freeport McMoran is American. And I've put their market caps up there. That's how valuable those companies are. And then by comparison, I've put the market caps of the world's 3 largest tech companies up there, Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia. And you can see just how much bigger those tech companies are than those mining companies. And yet, you could not have a PC or an iPhone or anything without mining. It's just foundational to them. And yet, Apple is, how many times bigger? I can't even do the maths. 20 times bigger. 20 times bigger? Yes. 20 times bigger. So thank God I've got that right. Now, this is quite an interesting little table, and it shows mining around the world and where it's growing and where it's shrinking. And this goes from the year 2000 to 2017. I don't have a more recent version of it. But you can see North America, it's grown a little bit. Latin America, it's grown 24%, quite a bit. Africa, quite a bit. Europe, mining we're mining less and less and less. We mine 17% less now than we did 20 years ago. And then obviously Asia has gone bananas, and Oceania, which is selling straight into the Asian market, has gone bananas as well. So, that is also the way that wealth is going. It's leaving Europe. And with that in mind, we discuss a subject that we all think about every day. The decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and some 200 different explanations as to why Rome declined and fell have been offered, and these range from climate change, please, the rise of Christianity, lethargy from too much time spent in hot baths, too many banquets, even alien invasion. But one argument you never hear, and we're about to make it now, is that Rome declined and fell due to the depletion of its mines. Now, at its mightiest, 50 to 75 people lived in the Roman Empire, and there it is in green. And the Pax Romana, the peace was kept by the Roman army, 100,000 soldiers, all paid in gold and silver. And the quantity of gold and silver in circulation was on a scale never before seen in the world, and never seen again until the gold rushes of the second half of the 19th century. And there's one argument you often hear. I love this. This looks like Roman legions meet Scarface, this picture here. But we often hear that Roman soldiers were paid in salt. And that's the word soldier, saldare, means to give salt. And the word salary comes from giving salt, from the same source. But they weren't actually paid in salt. They were given an allowance to buy salt. And obviously salt's very healthy. And by the way, if you want Dominic Frisby with his healthy hat on, every morning have a pinch of salt, pinch of Celtic sea salt, before you have anything, crunch it up, eat it, and then drink your first glass of water of the day, and it will hydrate you much better. It works as an electrolyte, a little magic trick there. And the Roman soldiers were at it. So there's very little gold and silver in central Italy. In fact, there's none at all. And originally they used bronze as money. But as the empire expanded and they took over, particularly Macedonia and then northern Spain, and they took over the mines there. And those mines in Macedonia were the mines that enabled Alexander the Great and his predecessor, Philip of Macedon. Gold and silver started making its way into the Roman money. Now, the Roman business model, very effective business model, is you conquer, and then you plunder, and then you tax. And it's a great business model, and it's been tried and tested by conquerors throughout history, never failed anyone. But it only works as long as the empire keeps expanding. When the empire is no longer expanding, you no longer have the income from conquest and loot. And so you have to find other ways to get income. And by the 1st century, taxation was only, it didn't cover the imperial budget. So where were they going to get the money from? And the solution wasn't to rein in their spending, it was to mine it. And in that regard, gold mining is a bit like central banking, in that when you're mining gold or silver, you're creating money that wasn't previously there and bringing it into existence. And I put that gold mining and central banking, and one of those is fiction and one of those is fact. And the dwarf is the fact, if you didn't need... In any case, so here, this is a mountain range in northern Spain called Las Medulasit. And this is not AI, that's a genuine picture. And what you see there is the entire mountain range has been washed away. And the way the Romans used to mine is they would fire the rock to heat it up, and then they would pour water on it, and that's how they would extract the ore from the metal. And in the course of doing that, the pollution was so bad, it's thought to have reached Greenland. That's how bad the pollution was from their doing this. They obviously needed extraordinary amounts of wood as well. And you can see, like, that mountainside would have been like that once upon a time, but it's just been washed away. And there was a big argument as to whether it should be allowed to be a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of the fact that it was created from something that was so environmentally damaging. But eventually it was accepted. And the Romans fought, first Julius Caesar, then Augustus Caesar, and it was only Agrippa who eventually took the region. People fought long and hard for it because obviously it was so valuable. And once the Romans had taken control of it, there followed the biggest mining operation the world had ever seen. And those mines produced for 200 years. And in that mountain range, there are some 250 different mine sites have been found. And that mine, there was no other region in the Roman Empire was as prolific. And that mine brought the gold and silver that the Roman Empire needed. However, after 200 years, the resource ran out. The mines depleted. Oh, by the way, before I come to that, just Pliny wrote this wonderful description about everything that happened there, and he said it was all motivated by the greed for gold. And we'll come back to this again, but the greed for gold motivated people to do some of the most incredible things. And in this case, huge engineering advances. Underground ventilation, lighting, drainage, all things never previously done in mining. But the most important thing was how to get the water they needed to the mountains. And we tend to think of the Roman aqueducts of being there so that the Romans could all have hot baths. A lot of the time, those aqueducts were there to get water to the mines. That's why the aqueducts were built. And northern Spain has got some of the most incredible aqueducts that you'll see in the Roman Empire. And it was all to get the water to the mines. All these huge engineering advances, all motivated by the greed for gold. But as I said, the mines depleted. They ran out of gold and silver. And it's only after those mines depleted that you saw the sudden acceleration in the debasement of Roman coinage. And the Roman silver coin, the denarius, went from 93% to 0. Just like the US dollar and the pound. So that's why I make the case that perhaps mining and the depletion of its mines had something to do with the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And we're on a similar trajectory. Now, by the way, I love this. You look at the coins. People think that everyone before Galileo and Christopher Columbus and so on thought that the earth was flat. The Romans knew that the world was round, and I present as evidence for this 2 coins. There's a denarius from Hadrian there, and a Trajan aureus there. And here we see Providentia, who is the Roman goddess of foresight, overlooking the globe, the Roman Empire. And here, this is Trajan. This is an early coin of Hadrian. And there we see Trajan, the previous emperor, handing Hadrian ownership of the empire, a globe. They knew the world was round. And Aristotle said the world was round. We're going to fast forward now to England in the late 17th century. And Sir Isaac Newton, known as a physicist, also a great alchemist, but he was also master of the mint. And the equivalent of that would be governor of the Bank of England today. And British coinage was a mess because the silver content of a British coin was worth more melted down than the face value of the silver coin. So everyone was melting down the silver coins and selling them to the French. And this was a huge trade, and we'd run out of silver. It was all going onto the continent. And in addition to that, something like 15 to 20% of coins were counterfeit. They were fake coins. And worst of all, people were using those fake coins to pay their taxes. So the British government was finding itself handed all these fake coins. And Isaac Newton was called in to sort it all out. And he is credited with putting Britain on the gold standard, which became the model for the world. He's the father of the gold standard. But that gold standard was accidental. He was trying to put England on a gold and silver standard. And he said to the British government, if you want to stop people selling this bullion abroad, you need to reduce the silver content by 20% of the coins so that the silver content matches the face value of the coin. But Parliament also saw the value of their wealth being destroyed by 20%, and they said no. They didn't understand the difference between token value and actual value. So Newton was never able to solve that problem. He was able to solve the problem of the counterfeiters and those poor counterfeiters. He's now seen as having been autistic, and he pursued the counterfeiters with autistic zeal and rumbled every single one of them, and they all ended up in the gallows. Poor people didn't realise they were up against probably the cleverest bloke in history. But nevertheless, he couldn't get his silver and gold standard working. But in 1695, some Portuguese explorers discovered gold in Brazil, in Minas Gerais. And there was a huge gold rush. And in those days, you would have to give the king's fifth. You would have to give a fifth of everything you found to the king in taxes. But if you were a member of the clergy, then you could give it to the church instead. So amazingly, all those Portuguese discovering gold in Minas Gerais were all clergymen. But one person writing about it, a clergyman writing about it, described the gold rush as white-coloured, black, Amerindian, men and women, young and old, poor and rich, nobles and commoners, laymen and clergy. Everyone rushed to Minas Gerais in Brazil. And within 30 years, world gold output had doubled. And by 1750, that one area accounted for 65% of global production. And it all went back to Portugal. And the Portuguese, with whom we've always had very good trading relations, and I think they're the one country with whom we've never been to war, little stat for you, all used their gold to buy English manufactured goods. So that 2/3 of all the gold discovered in Brazil ended up in Britain. And this sudden influx of gold was what made Newton's gold standard possible. And in Cornwall, it particularly went to the southwest and the south coast for obvious reasons because of the trading routes. That's a Portuguese moidor. That was the Portuguese gold coin, and they were all coming to England. Very little specie of any other kind is to be met with, said the Cornish Receiver General. We have hardly any money but Portugal gold. And those gold coins would eventually make their way back to the mint, where they'd be reminted as guineas. And the silver, meanwhile, carried on leaving, because now the Chinese and the Indians were paying even more than the Europeans for silver. And with the South Sea trade and all of that, the silver was leaving Europe altogether and going to Asia. And so it was that discovery that made Newton's gold standard possible. Now, a very similar thing happened in the 20th century. There was a carpenter by the name of James Marshall who was working at a sawmill, a wood mill, in California. And at this time, California was still Mexican. It only got handed over to the Americans a week after this discovery. But he was investing, and they didn't know about it, poor people. Anyway, he was doing some work in the sawmill, and he looked in a ditch at the bottom of the sawmill, and he saw two gleaming things looking at him, about the size of half a pea. And he picked them both up, and he looked at him, and he ran back to the shed where everyone was working. "Eureka, boys, I think I found a gold mine." And the owner, this was a John Sutter's sawmill. And John Sutter had an Encyclopedia Britannica, and he looked it up, and they all agreed that it was gold. And he told them not to tell anyone. And they all, of course, went straight out and started panning for gold. And he lost all his employees almost straight away. And word spread up the river to a Mormon settlement, and they started panning for gold. And one of the Mormons went to San Francisco with a bottle of gold dust, shouting, "Gold, gold," from the American river. And so was the California gold rush ignited. And this was 1848. The following year, 1849, 90,000 people travelled to California. It was almost deserted prior to that point. And 90,000 people is just an extraordinary number for the time. And 40,000 went from the East Coast across America in stagecoaches. Very treacherous journey, risked their lives, many ended up dead. There are examples of people resorting to cannibalism, braving freezing cold weather, desert heat, all the rest of it. 20,000 went on a boat right round at the bottom of Argentina, Cape Horn, and came up the other side. And 30,000 went down to Panama and then marched across Panama through mosquito-infested jungle and then got a boat back up the other side. And that's how they all got there. And 1849, that's why the American football team is called the 49ers, and the California state motto, I think, is Eureka. Anyway, and what was amazing about this gold rush is it was a gold rush for every man. You didn't need expensive equipment. All you needed was a pick and a shovel, and you could explore. And it was a bit like early Bitcoin mining in that respect, in that, you know, students could mine Bitcoins on their computers. You didn't have to have huge amounts of capital or anything like that. So because it was a gold rush for every man went there. And there was an article, "The whole country resounds with the sordid cry of gold." People left their families, they left their home, their wives in search of their futures. The field is left half planted, the house half built, and everything neglected but the manufacture of shovels and pickaxes. No capital is required to obtain this gold, and the labouring man wants nothing but his pick and shovel and tin pan with which to dig and wash. And as a result of this, it created all these economic distortions. The first being that anyone who worked as a domestic servant or anything like that, low-level workers, all just got up and left their jobs and went to California. So there was a huge shortage of domestic servants. So for a brief period, domestic servants were earning as much as congressmen because they were in such demand. There was a huge shortage of women in California. It was all men who went there. So things, you know, female services, for want of a better word, washing, ironing and cooking, all charged huge amounts. You would have to pay 15 ounces to spend the night with a sex worker, to spend the night with a lady. 15 ounces. $2,500 gold today, 15 ounces would be $45,000 to spend the night with a lady. And there was no justice. Justice was issued locally. One guy was caught stealing $300, and he had a big T branded on his face and his ears cut off. So maybe we need to bring that back. But anyway... And it was just an incredible time. But as a result of all these people going there, they needed feeding. So farms all sprung up. They needed clothing manufacture. They needed equipment. Factories sprung up. All this needed financing. Banks sprung up. Infrastructure. They needed to get the gold back into America. So railways and roads were built. It was the reason the Panama Canal eventually got built. And just this incredible acceleration in investment. And what was quite interesting about it is that gold funded the Unionists in the Civil War, funded Lincoln. And one of the reasons they won that Civil War was they were better funded than the Confederates. But most of the Californian gold went to Lincoln and that war effort. But you saw, you know, incredible energy and creativity and courage and determination, imagination, innovation, all these things, wonderful human qualities. But then you saw terrible human qualities: greed, ruthlessness, crime, violence, environmental destruction, forests torn down, rivers polluted, you name it. And it all happened so quickly. And what that led to, there was an Australian guy called Edward Hargraves, who was in Sydney, and a boat landed in Sydney Harbour. And it was like, gold, gold in California. You went to the harbour to get news from around the world. And they're all gold, gold. And he had been wandering around Australia for 20 or 30 years, and he heard about this gold, and he got straight on the boat to go back to California. And the bloke he was sharing a cabin with was a sheep farmer. And he'd sold his sheep and bought a ticket, and he'd gone to California as well. And they shared a cabin, and while they were in the cabin, they started discussing the geology of New South Wales. And they discussed it over the journey, to the extent that they thought, there's gold in New South Wales, there must be. And so they got straight on the boat and came back again to Australia. And indeed, they found gold there, and that sparked the Australian gold rush, on which Australia was built. And incredible stories about the Australian gold rush. The one I like is that for a brief period, it became a good thing to become a convict, because you got free passage to Australia, so they stopped sending the convicts there. But again, Australia within a couple of decades became the world's largest gold producer, and of course that gold all went to Britain and helped us do imperial things. And then, of course, the biggest, there was discoveries in New Zealand, in Western Australia, in Victoria, and then the biggest discovery of the lot, the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. And the man who made that discovery, an Australian prospector by the name of George Harrison, anyone tell me how much he sold his discovery for, his prospect for? £10. £10. And that discovery has produced, it used to produce 1,000 ounces per year, 1,000 tons per year. It produced 40% of all the gold that has ever been mined. That one discovery, and he sold it for a tenner. Bad deal. So, ladies and gents, we're coming to the end of my little talk, and hopefully I've just told you some great little stories from history, and you just see how mining underpins everything, from money right through to everything we do and have around us. And yet, it is the most loathed industry in the world. Whenever you watch a film, the miners are always the bad guys. There's a scene from Avatar. The miners are always the baddies in Avatar. And note, that was the most expensive film in Hollywood history, and its AI graphics are not as good as mine. That's how much it's advanced. And the miners are always, and the reason miners, even today, this picture was taken a couple of years ago of cobalt mines in the DRC. And you kind of think, how is it possible in today's world for, this kind of scene to be taking place with all those men, carrying those bags? But then you think, at the same time, it's providing those people with opportunities and salaries that they wouldn't otherwise have. Like all these things, it's never quite simple. But these pictures that were shown, and there are kids in there, and we'll come to that in a moment. There are kids in those pictures are reminiscent of the pictures that the Brazilian photographer Sebastião Salgado took of the famous Brazilian mines in the 70s. They're exactly the same, all those men with the bags of ore on their backs. And with great quote here, "The first time I saw the mine, I was speechless. I got goosebumps. 52,000 men working without a single machine in a well 200 metres deep. Half the people were carrying heavy bags up the wooden stairs. The other descended the muddy slopes, sinking into the abyss." What a great quote. And there's another picture from DRC, and it's almost identical to the Salgado picture. I mean, they're just so similar, it's incredible. And this has been going on since forever. This is a Roman writer, Diodorus, describing the mines of Egypt. "There is absolutely no consideration nor relaxation for sick or maimed, for aged man or weak woman. All are forced to labour at their tasks until they die, worn out by misery amid their toil." I find these pictures incredible. These are coal mines in Virginia in 1913, so barely 100 years old, we used to send all the kids down the mine. You look at those boys, they're all prepubescent, or most of them, they can't be, 12, 13 years old. And you can't really see in the light, but you just look at some of their eyes. If you just look at their eyes, they've got these the weird eyes, some of them. And that's because, do you remember when the Chilean miners were rescued in the mines and they were all given those sunglasses to wear? Because they're underground all day long in the darkness. And they were called trappers. They would be in charge of ventilating the mines. And here we see, they didn't have torches. They've got their little candles on their heads. But look at his eyes. All their eyes, those poor boys having their eyes damaged. And this is going on 100 years ago. And it was happening in the UK as well and in Virginia. And these terrible things that human beings have done to each other. But yet, because of the work that those kids did, there was coal mining, coal energy was created. You could say, some rich person got to keep their house warm. But also, human beings generally advanced. So those people sort of made our modern comforts and modern luxuries so that people no longer have to go down there. They made that possible. And today, of course, in the advanced parts of the world, it's all automated and AI and robots and advanced exploration and all this incredible high tech. So the industry is getting better and better and better, but it's never going to be perfect. Here's an argument you never hear. This is a picture of Brazilian rainforest. It's a picture I'm sure many of you have seen many times. All the deforested areas. What's happening now in Brazil is all the areas that are remaining forested that aren't being chopped down are areas owned by mining companies, by Vale in particular, because they have a duty to protect the land and it's their land and there's clear title. Whereas all the areas that are being logged, and that's where the land there's no clear ownership or it's not owned by mining companies. So even with all the environmental destruction that mining has done over the years, it's actually preserving the Brazilian rainforest in a way that it would not otherwise be possible. And you'd think mining would be making that argument and telling the world that story, but it's such a dopey industry that they don't. Their PR is terrible. So my final point is, in answer to the question, is mining good or bad? It's not as simple as good or bad. It's a necessary evil, but it's an incredible industry that has made many amazing things possible. And on that note, ladies and gents, I thank you very much for listening. I know it's hot in here. Thank you very much. Thank you.